right, once again, I'm going to put to work MSNBC political analyst and Daily Beast columnist Jonathan Alter, senior writer for Newsweek Bill Powell, and MSNBC political analyst and host of the Hugh Hewitt Show, Hugh Hewitt. Hugh, one of the things that has surprised me over the last couple of weeks talking to voters around the country is that we see this Democratic frustration out there on the streets, but Republicans are frustrated too. I think if I would put them in order, number one would be the tweeting of Donald Trump, that they don't like that he's doing that, but they share Democrats' frustration in the lack of getting things done in Washington. They voted to start getting things done in Washington. Do you see any of that on the horizon?
Oh, I've been out as well, Chris, and I compliment you for doing those sorts of things. Where I go and I talk to Republicans primarily and conservatives, they're overwhelmingly happy about Justice Gorsuch. That was a delivery of a generational change, protecting a Supreme Court center-right majority that they made, number one in their minds when they voted. I think they're very happy with the sea change in foreign policy. President Trump delivered a rebuke to Syria for dropping chemical weapons on their civilians, one that President Obama didn't do. President Trump dropped the Moab in Afghanistan, which sent a signal around the world, and he's charmed President Xi on North Korea. So the sea change in foreign policy is pretty doggone welcome in my side of the aisle as well around the country. They do want to see, but perhaps are more patient than the other members of the panel with the Congress. But as I said in the last segment, Paul Ryan knows, Donald Trump knows, Leader McConnell knows, they've got to deliver the big domestic policy tickets that you just were talking about with those folks in North Carolina.
Yeah, Paul Ryan with his 22% approval rating, he's got to look at that and say, what am I doing here? In the meantime, Bill, you wrote an article for Newsweek called Why the Second 100 Days Are More Important. What's your thesis?
Well, first of all, as someone who has just relocated to this country after nearly a decade, where presidents serve 10-year terms and tend to look out in 100-year chunks of time as opposed to 100-day chunks of time, I find this whole discussion sort of amusing. But nonetheless, the second 100 days are teed up now for health care again, round two, with the Republicans in Congress inching toward a compromise. Secondly is the tax reform bill, rolled out chaotically, it must be said, last week, but nonetheless, that's now on the table. That train is in motion. We'll know more by the end of the summer as to how likely tax overhaul is and what form it will take. And the third thing, largely forgotten, is infrastructure. I think the president, particularly if he wants to, as that gentleman in your segment said, get things done in a bipartisan way, can go to the Democrats and say sometime in the next 100 days, go to Chuck Schumer and say, Chuck, let's do a deal on infrastructure, because that's something that appeals to Democrats almost more than it does to certainly Freedom Caucus members of his own party.
Not to mention Chuck Schumer's in a state that could use a lot of help on infrastructure.
Quite right. Quite right.
And a lot of people joked about this, but and he's not alone as a president finding out how difficult it is to govern as opposed to campaign for president. But Donald Trump talked about just how challenging being president is. Take a listen.
This is more work than in my previous life. I thought it would be easier.
Now, Jonathan, it's easy to make jokes about that. Progressives can mock that statement. But do you see it in any way as a positive sign? He's acknowledging he has a learning curve, and maybe knowing means you can start to address it.
Yeah, and I think he has addressed it some on foreign policy by getting rid of General Flynn, who was a disaster, and he has a better national security advisor in General McMaster. We still do have a problem overseas. We're basically siding with dictators. You know, he kind of snubs Angela Merkel and he embraces Sisi in Egypt, and you could go right down the line through Turkey and a bunch of other countries where he is really contributing to what you could call a democracy recession in the world. And for those of us who care a lot about democracy, not just in the United States, but abroad, we got to make sure that doesn't become a democracy depression over time. So he's not really standing up for American values, as one might hope, but maybe he can learn. And there are some signs, as you indicate, that he's adjusting to reality. He's no longer calling China a currency manipulator. He's no longer threatening to rip up NAFTA tomorrow. So maybe over time he'll settle in, and he does come to office with the least experience in government of any president in American history.
And yet again, and it's always anecdotal, I haven't talked to thousands of Americans, but a lot of the Republicans, Hugh, that I talk to still do trust his deal-making skills. They still do think that now he's sort of figuring out how Washington works, that he can still pull it off. I want to go to all three of you because so many Americans are looking to say, what is Washington going to get done? And since Bill brought it up, taxes, health care, infrastructure, by the end of the year, Hugh, what progress will have been made, if any, do you think?
I think there's going to be a lot of legislation by the end of 2017. And I have to correct my friend Jonathan on a couple of things. The relationship with Israel is as good as it's been in 10 years with Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump. The relationship with King Abdullah in Jordan and with President Sisi in Egypt is improved. And President Sisi, we need to be on our side in that situation in the Middle East. I think people are generally on team happy that he is moving towards the center. He is not deporting children who are here under the childhood arrival, DACA. He has not torn up NAFTA, as Jonathan pointed out. He said about NATO, suddenly it's relevant again. I'm very happy to hear that because he got some changes that he wanted. But it does come down to the next 100. Bill's absolutely right. The second 100 days are really, by the time we get to September and October, we'll know whether Donald Trump brought real change to the domestic policy of the United States as he has to the judicial policy of the United States and the foreign policy of the United States.
Jonathan, where do you see the Democrats being able to make some kind of deal? Because one of the concerns I hear from Democrats is they don't want their leaders to become the party of no. They want stuff done.
Yeah, well, as Bill indicated, infrastructure is critical. And actually, Chuck Schumer has already gone to President Trump and said that he wants to do some kind of deal on infrastructure. And Schumer gave an interview yesterday where he said Trump's reaction to that was to change the subject. So he has not been willing to engage on the details, even on something that he knows a lot about, which is building things. The Democrats' proposal on infrastructure is quite different from the Republican proposal, which basically something that allows, companies to put up toll roads and that kind of thing where they can make money. And a lot of what's necessary in infrastructure are repairs where there's no direct money for big business. So they have some ways to go on a compromise on infrastructure, but I think it's very doable.
Bill, we're out of time, but I want to ask you really quickly, if one of these three things gets done first, what do you see happening?
I think I'd bet on tax reform. I think there's real popular support for that. I think it's hugely complicated, but more political support, I would bet for that than a health care hall that people are still very confused about and wary of.
Bill Powell, Jonathan Alter, Hugh Hewitt, good to see you guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris.